May 3rd here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with Russia's delivery of refined petroleum to North Korea. Moscow apparently sent more than Pyongyang's annual import cap of refined petroleum to Pyongyang in March alone, the White House says. Washington is planning to announce, alongside its partners, new coordinated sanctions on the regime this month. Iraqi militant group, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, launched attacks on targets in Israel with cruise missiles from Iraqi territory on Thursday. A Hamas delegation is set to visit Egypt soon for further Gaza ceasefire talks. The OECD has revised up its forecast for the South Korean economy, saying it will expand by 2.4% this year, on the back of robust exports and a boost in private consumption. The global organization also expects steady global growth for both 2024 and 2025. The White House has revealed that Russia is exceeding UN limits by delivering substantial amounts of refined petroleum to North Korea. In response, the U.S. and its partners are gearing up to impose new sanctions. Our Shin Se-byuk reports.
White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said Thursday that Russia is shipping refined petroleum to North Korea in amounts exceeding the UN Security Council limits. According to a UN Security Council resolution, North Korea's annual refined oil imports should not exceed 500,000 barrels. However, in March alone, a third of that limit was delivered to North Korea.
In March alone, Russia shipped more than 165,000 barrels of refined petroleum to the DPRK. Given the close proximity of Russian and North Korean commercial ports, Russia could sustain these shipments indefinitely.
The White House also said that Russia has sent more than the annual cap already this year, a move that highlights the close ties between Pyongyang and Moscow. It also suggested that this is likely in exchange for North Korea supplying Russia with ballistic missiles and other military equipment. In response, the U.S., along with South Korea, Japan, and the European Union, are planning to announce new sanctions targeting arms and oil trade between North Korea and Russia.
We are currently working with our partners, including Australia, the European Union, Japan, New Zealand, the Republic of Korea, and the United Kingdom to announce new coordinated sanctions designations this month.
Washington also pointed out that it was Russian opposition that led to the shutting down of a UN panel of experts overseeing sanctions against North Korea. On March 28th, Russia vetoed the annual renewal of the UN panel, thereby dismantling a key surveillance mechanism. Since then, South Korea, the U.S., and Japan have been exploring ways to create an independent body to replace the panel and are considering joint sanctions against Pyongyang and Moscow that could be enforced without a UN Security Council resolution. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Washington has sent a warning that North Korean hackers are sending emails disguised as the U.S. government officials or experts in order to collect information related to U.S. policy toward North Korea. The U.S. State Department, National Security Agency, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation jointly announced on Thursday that the North Korean hacking group Kim Soo-ki is sending emails impersonating people known as spear phishing to gain sensitive information. The advisory noted that Kim Soo-ki sent an email to the U.S. government and international organization officials in late 2023 and early 2024, inviting them to give a keynote speech at a think tank event held on the topic of the U.S. policies on North Korea. The hacking group was added to the U.S. Treasury sanctions list in December 2023. Iraqi militant group, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, launched missile attacks on Thursday, targeting the Israeli capital of Tel Aviv. That's according to Reuters, citing a source within the group. Now, the specific locations hit by these missiles have not been disclosed yet. We'll bring you more details on our upcoming newscast at noon Korea time. Israel and Hamas may finally be closing in on a ceasefire deal that would also allow for the release of Israeli hostages. This comes as a senior Hamas official positively assessed the recent negotiations and will be sending a delegation to Cairo to potentially finalize an agreement. Lee Seung-jae has more.
It's been months since a temporary ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas in November last year saw the release of 105 civilians taken hostage by Hamas. However, since then, talks of ceasefire and hostage release have been stuck in limbo, with the two sides unable to iron out important details. That could all change over the next few days as Hamas has decided to send a delegation to Cairo to potentially finalize another ceasefire agreement. According to Reuters, senior Hamas officials have reviewed the deal and given a positive assessment. While specific contents of Israel's proposal have not been made public, the Wall Street Journal reported that once an Israeli hostage-Palestinian detainee exchange is concluded, it would be followed by a 10-week ceasefire. This would also be followed by more negotiations for a truce deal. An Israeli official also told the Times of Israel that Israel has made major concessions for the agreement and that an agreement between the two sides would mean a 10-week ceasefire, release of 33 hostages, and would allow residents of northern Gaza to return home safely. However, a Hamas spokesperson warned that an offensive in Rafah would halt any negotiation talks. This could be a problem, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated on Thursday that the military will begin an operation against Hamas in Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah. He emphasized that Israel will do what it can to win the war, another sign that the military will carry out the attacks no matter. The Prime Minister is set to take part in meetings with Israel's War Cabinet and the National Security Cabinet on Thursday as they await Hamas's response to the proposed ceasefire deal. 이승재, Arirang News.
South Korean crime action franchise, the Roundup, is back for its fourth edition under the title Punishment and has swept the box office once again. It already logged 5 million admissions in just a week after its release. We're joined by Jason Vesheves for more. Welcome back, Jason.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure as always.
Well, the fourth edition of the Roundup is showing a strong box office performance. In fact, stronger than its predecessors. Where is this strong performance coming from?
Well, I mean, it's a combination of reasons, as with many success stories. I think the film industry is showing signs that it's beginning to bounce back following a difficult few years during the COVID pandemic. We saw the success of 12 the Day and then Exuma, which surprised industry observers. And so I think the success of this film follows on from that, but I think it's also a very successful franchise. This is the fourth installment. The previous two films sold over 10 million tickets. So it's not really a surprise that it's doing well, but I think there was actually some concern that because the third installment was, widely seen as a disappointment, that perhaps the fourth film, would show signs that it's beginning to lose steam. But actually, it's on the contrary. It's doing very well. It opened with 820,000 admissions on its opening day, which is actually the fourth biggest opening in, the history of the Korean film box office. So, and it's actually surpassed 6 million admissions late last night, so it's now on 6 million tickets sold, so performing very well, and it's also been sold, pre-sold to over 150 territories overseas, so 164 territories to be exact. So it's doing, I think it's going to do pretty well globally as well. Of course, it premiered at the Berlin Film Festival in February.
Definitely. Foreign media outlets are also putting a spotlight on its success, aren't they?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're seeing, there's just a lot of interesting Korean content. I'm originally from the UK, and the film is actually being released in the UK today. So it's actually going to screen in theatres, and years ago when I was there, it would be months, if not years, before Korean film would hit theatres in Britain. But now, actually, we're seeing films be released in the United Kingdom just a few days after, its theatrical release in Korea. That was true of 12 the Day and Exuma. and now this film, The Roundup Punishment. And yeah, it received good reviews following its screening at the Berlin Film Festival. The trade publications, Variety, Screen International, they gave it good reviews. And, you know, it's a very simple concept. You know, Ma Dong-seok, or Don Lee, plays this detective. You know, he's obviously very formidable and he's unorthodox. And, yeah, you know, it's fun to watch. He is Korea's action hero that was somewhat, I think, solidified following the success of Train to Busan. If you remember, he literally punches his way through the train.
Right.
And so, you know, we've seen that kind of persona evolve and to, you know, incredible effect in the Roundup films.
Right, a pretty straightforward story, yet really fun and exciting. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. Now, hopes are high that the fourth installment may earn $100 million as it did for the second edition back in 2022. Jason, what's your take on the earnings this year?
Yeah, I think it'll do pretty well. I mean, cinema tickets have actually increased in price, so that means that films are generating more revenue. The concern before was that fewer people going to the cinema, and to some, you know, that still is a worry for the film industry. But like I said just a couple of minutes ago, I think the industry is perhaps showing signs that it's turned a corner. We saw that with the success of Exuma, 12/12 the Day, and this film as well. So given the increase in ticket prices and the fact that a lot of people are going to see this film, yes, it's going to do very well. It's already broken even. So that's encouraging. You know, only half a dozen films broke even last year, and already we've seen around that number break even this year. So, and we're in May, so we haven't even, you know, got to the first half of the year yet.
Right.
So it is encouraging for the film industry. Yes, this film is going to generate a lot of money, and there's premium kind of seating, and you've got premium formats. So, you know, the big IMAX screens, and you've got, you know, the comfortable seats, and they generate further revenue as well. And people are quite keen to take advantage of those, especially here in Korea, where, you know, there's a huge market for that.
Right. But, you know, before I let you go, there are also concerns that the Roundup is taking up all the screens and seats across the country and possibly squeezing out other movies. What's happening here?
Okay, I think there are different ways in which you can view this. You can come from different perspectives. So, yeah, you know, it's screened on 80% of the nation's screens.
Right.
So some have taken issue with that. This is not a new problem. When Battleship Island was released a few years ago, the distributor or the studio behind the film was widely criticized for it, and it actually affected the success of it. And, you know, those concerns were somewhat muted during the pandemic because, you know, exhibitors were struggling. And so films are now beginning to do quite well again. And so these concerns are resurfacing. Now, I think the exhibitors would argue that, you know, they built the cinemas and they have every right to screen, you know, the films in their own screens. And also, I think, you know, the exhibitors had a really difficult time during the pandemic. And I think this is an opportunity for them to kind of recoup some of their losses. You know, some of them really struggle to survive.
Definitely.
And the other issue is that actually, you know, for much of over the past few weeks, there hasn't been a lot out there. So yes, it is dominating screens. It is a problem. And compared to the United States, you know, in terms of the percentage a film will be screened, in terms of the percentage of the number of screens a film will be shown on, you know, it is lower there than it is here. You know, if you look at the films like the Avengers and the Marvel films. That being said, though, I think I'm not sure this concern is generating the same kind of same amount of attention that it did a few years ago. So, yeah, I think it's a nuanced issue, but yeah, I think the other concern is if you over-regulate the industry and you put a cap on the amount of screens that a film can be shown on, that potentially hampers growth. So that's something that they need to look at.
Certainly. All right, Jason, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it, and you have a great day.
You too. Thank you for having me.
South Korea's economy will grow by 2.6% this year, supported by steady exports, the OECD believes. The OECD also projects an upward trend for global economic growth for 2024. Our An Sung-jin has the details.
Though economic growth remains modest, the OECD forecasts a positive global outlook. In its outlook report released on Thursday, the OECD has raised the global economic growth rate to 3.1%, with a stable employment market and further slowdown in inflation. It stated that the global economy has been relatively resilient, with little change made from 2023 of 3.1% and the projected growth of 3.2% in 2025. Estimated growth for this year has been revised upward by 0.2 percentage points from February's predictions. Though development differs from country to country, developing countries, as well as the U.S. in particular, have shown stable growth. The OECD has raised the growth projection for the U.S. by 0.5 percentage points to 2.6%. For Europe, it remains sluggish as the energy crisis drags on. It still stressed that uncertainties remain due to geopolitical risks, extended high inflation for some countries, and the possibility of a sluggish recovery in the Chinese economy. As for South Korea, the OECD has raised its economic growth rate for 2024 to 2.6%, 0.4 percentage points higher than February's outlook. The presidential office elaborated on the country's upward revision.
This is largely due to a strong performance in major industries such as semiconductors and a better-than-expected recovery of private consumption.
He also added that the growth rate is the highest among G20 countries with a per capita income of over $20,000. The OECD provided further recommendations for the need for structural reforms, especially in pensions to respond to the rapidly aging society, and also suggested innovation in regulations to further support small and medium-sized businesses. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Amid the ongoing dispute over the expansion of the number of students admitted to medical schools nationwide, now most of them have had their total admission places for next year finalized. Our Choi Soo-hyung explains.
On Thursday, the Education Ministry has confirmed that the new total increased enrollment quota for 2025 at 31 medical schools across the country has so far been confirmed at 1,469 places. If the governing body at Cha University accepts the government's quota for its medical school, then the number of new places could rise to a maximum of 1,509. 9 national universities outside the capital region decided to admit only 50% of their regional allocated increase, while private universities are either sticking with the regional allotted increase or lowering it by just a few students. This is in line with the government's acceptance a week ago of a proposal by the presidents of 6 national universities to allow them to freely determine the admission slots for 2025, ranging from 50% to 100% of the administration's original quota increase. From 2026, if the dispute between the government and doctors is resolved, the increase in the number of new places for students is expected to reach 2,000. The government is continuing to urge junior doctors and medical professors to engage in dialogue with it. On Thursday, Health Minister Cho Kyu-hong said one-on-one meetings were possible, but asked representatives of the doctors and professors to participate in the Special Committee on Medical Reform with a proactive attitude. Regarding junior trainee doctors who walked off their jobs to protest the government's expansion plan, Minister Cho urged them to return to their hospitals, adding his ministry will shorten the permitted continuous number of work hours starting this month. Meanwhile, an inauguration ceremony was held on Thursday morning for the new leader of the Korean Medical Association, the largest organization representing doctors. During the ceremony, Im Hyun-taek, the new head, stated that the current medical dispute was a case of an abuse of power by the government against doctors. He has been strongly critical of the government's plan, saying he will do his best to stop it. Im plans to form a consultative body consisting of medical students, doctors and medical professors. However, the head of the Korean Intern Residents Association said that to date this has not been discussed. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Good morning. I'm Kim Si-young, and now we turn over to stories from around the world. We begin today in the US, where hundreds of police officers in riot cracked down on a pro-Palestinian protest camp at the University of California, Los Angeles. Thursday's pre-dawn police crackdown resulted in the arrest of more than 100 demonstrators on campus. The camp of over 1,000 protesters saw violent clashes with the police, where loud explosions from flashbang charges, stun grenades were heard, and police flares were used. The officers dismantled the encampment, tearing down the makeshift barriers and arresting protesters. While the protesters cried peaceful protest, US President Joe Biden said that vandalism, trespassing, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations, none of this is a peaceful protest. UCLA announced limited campus operations on Thursday and Friday, switching all classes to remote instruction. The European Union announced Thursday an aid package for Lebanon worth just under $1.1 billion to support the country's faltering economy and security forces and to prevent illegal migration. Much of the funds are expected to be used to strengthen border controls to prevent the flow of asylum seekers, illegal migration, and people smuggling into the European Union. Speaking in Beirut, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that Europe understands the challenges Lebanon faces and will maintain legal pathways for the resettlement of refugees. Lebanon's Prime Minister Najib Mikati welcomed the aid, saying that Lebanon's security is security for European countries and vice versa. The deal, which ends in 2027, follows similar funding for Egypt, Tunisia, and Mauritania to fortify their borders. In China, a section of an expressway in Guangdong province collapsed on Wednesday, killing at least 48 people and injuring 30. Chinese state media Xinhua News reported on Thursday that the collapsed section of the Meizhou-Dabu Expressway was 17.9 meters in length and 23 vehicles plunged into the collapsed section. The incident in the early hours of Wednesday was triggered by heavy rain. Meizhou city officials said on Thursday that 577 emergency workers and more than 80 rescue vehicles were dispatched to the site, but reported difficulties as landslides had buried some of the fallen vehicles deep in the mud. Southern China's Guangdong province has been suffering from damage from heavy rain since late April. The International Olympic Committee announced on Thursday the 36 selected athletes from 11 countries who will be competing in the refugee team for the 2024 Paris Olympics. The Olympics refugee team, comprised of 23 male and 13 female athletes, will compete in athletics, badminton, boxing, breakdancing, canoeing, cycling, judo, shooting, swimming, taekwondo, weightlifting and wrestling at the Games, which is set to begin on the 24th of July. The elite athletes from 11 countries were selected from the Olympic Solidarity Program funded by the IOC. IOC President Thomas Bach said that the refugee athletes should be proud of representing more than 100 million refugees and migrants around the world.
Good morning. We are expecting a big rise in highs this afternoon, jumping 2 to 5 degrees higher in most parts. So if you felt too warm yesterday afternoon, consider today's temperatures and do dress accordingly. Seoul and Chuncheon should get up to 29 degrees Celsius this afternoon, but much more comfortable on Jeju and Busan, topping out at 21 and 22 degrees respectively. Strong sunlight will boost UV levels nationwide, but air quality will be normal. Now to the 3-day weekend weather forecast. If you remember, last year's Children's Day weekend was a tough one with storm-force conditions on Jeju. And unfortunately, we're expecting more rough weather this year. There could be rain like is usually seen in summer with strong winds, especially on Jeju and the south coast. Those traveling near the water need to stay on high alert. And that rain should continue through Tuesday with much cooler temperatures. Then sunshine and warmer temperatures return later in the week. With that in mind, let's take a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back next Monday at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.